What's happening, y'all? This is your girl Megan from the Hood Astro Queen. I hope you guys are having a very productive but stress-free week. I hope you guys enjoyed your Labor Day weekend this past weekend. And yeah, as you can see by the title, today I wanted to talk about sun and negative aspect to the moon. And this was inspired by a question someone asked me. They asked me what was the most difficult aspect for a person to have in their natal chart. And upon thinking and pontificating and just really going through certain scenarios and configurations and various aspects, I arrived to this conclusion. And the conclusion is that, in my humble opinion, having your sun in negative aspect, which is either the opposition or the square, right? Sun square moon, are the most difficult aspects to have in a person's chart. And this is because your personal sense of security and what makes you really feel gratified as a person are just diametrically opposed to one another. When you're talking about the two most personal planets, right, in one's chart, your personality versus your ego. I mean, these are things that have an incredible amount of influence over the rest of your lives. And if they don't really mesh, it can compromise a person's mental stability. It can compromise a person's emotional stability, absolutely. And, everything in your life is just in a trickle down kind of way is impacted by those things. And if you're a little bit off, or if you're dealing with some obstacles that prevent you from really just being present and functional in that way, or your pivot, then it's like anything else is just going to be difficult to deal with. And as a result, a lot of these people who are born with sun square moon in their chart or sun in opposition to the moon in their chart are really, they can be some off balance, off kiltered individuals. And they can have some very difficult experiences, in which we'll get into in a few seconds. So just to set the stage and set the tone, I am specifically going to be discussing sun in opposition to the moon and sun squaring the moon in a person's natal chart. Now, when we get to the conjunction, which will be another video for a different day, the conjunction essentially blends two energies, or it's the blending of two planets. Even though there's a blending that occurs, it can yield some negative results. Conjunctions can be either negative or positive. But once again, different video for a different day. So we're going to start with sun squaring the moon. Now, people who are born with their sun squaring their moon, this plays out on an internal level, but it can cause one to manifest outward scenarios to recreate this internal struggle. These people experience a lot of internal conflict, and this conflict stems from needing two different things to be at peace, but these two things don't necessarily go together. Okay, so it boils down to this theme of like wants versus needs, right? What a person wants out of life is often diametrically opposed to what they need in order to feel whole and fulfilled and secure. What nourishes one central part of a person's identity is extremely crippling to their emotional security or even their personality. I wouldn't even say that they're opposed to one another. I would even say that when it comes to sun square moon, these are people who often feel like that their growth is thwarted. These are people who have a difficult time achieving things. They have a difficult time really feeling secure and satisfied and accomplished. They could also experience outwardly a lot of roadblocks that occur or that stand in between them and where they want to go. And there's often this sense that your free will doesn't necessarily serve you from a personality standpoint, which can cause these people to make a lot of choices in life that could gratify them on a superficial level, It could even bring them a lot of attention and positive recognition, but they could have a difficult time finding inner peace in the process. The way that they express themselves is often different from the way in which they relate to themselves. And this could result in the tendency to hop back and forth. These are people who can be extremely hard to read. They can often have this undercurrent, this underlying theme of feeling like they're betraying themselves no matter how they show up in the world. They feel like they have to sacrifice one part of who they are in order to support and cultivate and grow another part of who they are. This could also lead to issues with forging close relationships. And this stems from these people just being very difficult to understand. They could be very unpredictable. And a lot of times, these are people who have a difficult time even understanding themselves and knowing what they want. There could also be issues with self-soothing, which stems from a childhood trauma. Sun square moon individuals often deal with certain levels of either abandonment, neglect, or they experience an upbringing where maybe their emotional needs were not really adequately tended to. There's a disrupt in the nurturing process. This aspect could also create a lot of personality disorders that I tend to find. And these are people who have a difficult time just being satisfied or content with what they have. They are always feeling like they need more or like there's something that they're missing. These people can be plagued with chronic feelings of emptiness and insecurity as well. These are people who always feel like they're being held back by something, whether it's real or imagined. And it's just very difficult for them to grow as individuals. It's like they just feel like they're constantly being stifled. There could also be issues with remaining motivated or really feeling like you have the endurance and the longevity to carry out your goals once again, or to navigate through those roadblocks. And these people often have issues with the way in which they express themselves. And this is a conflict, an inner conflict that is ongoing. However, it can drive and fuel and motivate a lot of people to accomplish in spite of. So you do see a lot of successful people, or there can be a lot of very successful people with Sun square moon. And as is the case for most squares, they are negative aspects, right? But they do present kind of like a challenge for a person to, overcome. You could even look at this as people being motivated to fight through it. But that's for some, because it definitely depends on what else is going on in the person's chart and just free will, how they choose to handle it, right? Which, once again, is still difficult because with Sun square moon, your free will it's compromised, or your concept of your free will is compromised. But nonetheless, it can, for some people, definitely be a driving force in what causes them to accomplish great things. But for most people, it's just very exhausting, very crippling, and a pain in the ass. I've noticed that this could also bring about issues with authority, which could have been a result from their childhood as well. These are people who could have had a lot of conflict going on within their family dynamic as well, either where they're clashing with authority figures, or they could have noticed the dynamic between the mother and father be very tumultuous as well. Now, in ancient astrology, a lot of astrologers looked at the sun square the moon in a person's natal chart as that person being a product of two parents who never loved one another. So it's not uncommon to see people with this aspect have parents who could have separated or divorced very early in life. Whatever the case may be, it's very difficult for these people to integrate their divine femininity and masculinity in a way that makes them seek out healthy relationships with partners and people of the opposite sex. These are also people who can be prone to outbursts and sudden explosions. And as I stated before, they just are generally very unstable people. And the modality of the signs that this square occurs in can tell you a lot about what leads to these outbursts. So when you have fixed signs, so sun squaring the moon in a fixed sign, these are people who can brood over their emotions and brood over existing tensions and conditions and then reach a climax, right? A point where they bubble over and then all hell breaks loose. Even in terms of these people having difficulty navigating their everyday lives or really having a difficult time being satisfied and attaining things that make them feel whole. They would be more likely to remain in situations that they know don't really do it for them, right? In situations that are going to keep them stagnant, which makes this square a lot more difficult to navigate in terms of finding what does work for you. Now, when you have the cardinal signs, right, sun squaring moon in a cardinal sign, this can create a person whose outbursts can be a result of you blocking their ability to leave. So if you've ever heard of the term fight or flight, these are your flight based individuals. They could be very impatient and they're naturally oriented towards taking action. So when they spot a trigger, when they spot something that doesn't work for them, they opt to leave, right? Cardinal signs initiate and channel new energy. So they see something, they notice something, and then they go a different direction. Now, the pitfall of this is in terms of productivity and just, life circumstances is that they can find themselves kind of, running around like chickens with their head cut off because they're going from one situation to the next, to the next, to the next without fully examining their behavior and what triggered them. But when it comes to like emotional outbursts and things of that nature, these are people who could definitely, when they feel restricted or when they feel like they can't exit a situation, they'll lash out. However, mutable signs are the most destructive and unpredictable of all of the modalities in terms of sun square moon, because these are people who they can be very dangerous. Okay. And it's dangerous because their emotional stability is just hugely compromised in a way that, sun squaring the moon in a cardinal or in a fixed sign may not necessarily have. So these are people who are more prone to having breaks with reality, going postal, spazzing out, committing murder. Of course, these are extreme worst case scenarios, but it's to illustrate the point that these people have control over themselves up to a certain point. And once they are triggered, okay, once they reach a certain point or where they're backed into a corner, they lose their grip on reality. They can completely lose control. So it's very important for these people to be mindful of their limits. Be mindful of how much they can take, especially when it comes to like a circumstantial standpoint, right? The type of people that they work well with, the type of people they don't work well with, the type of situations or the type of goals or the type of circumstances that they can place themselves in. Now, moving on to the opposition. Okay, moon in opposition to the sun. If you were born with this aspect, it's likely that you were born on a full moon, which, of course, in that full moon kind of vein, adds to this level of instability with these people. They can be very emotionally charged. And I would say more so than your sun square moon individuals. The sun square moon individuals are facing a lot of internal conflict, but when you're talking about sun in opposition to the moon, this can manifest in a lot of outward circumstances that are triggered by other people. So these people can end up being very reactionary based people, constantly reacting and having knee-jerk emotional reactions to things happening to them. And this also makes this opposition a lot more difficult to manage because you can't control other people, nor can you always control external circumstances and situations. So this is the biggest way that this opposition differs from the square. Okay. These are also people who can be overly reliant on other people, and it creates a very strong need for relationships. However, there's always this sense of lack of, once again, inner stability, inner peace, which can play out for a person with their sun in opposition to the moon as them always being on the outs with other people. These are very defensive people, and rightfully so, because a lot of times they manifest or they attract a lot of situations in which they are just on the odds or at odds or on the outs with other individuals. This dynamic could have also played out within the family dynamic. So these are people who either their parents were not together, very similar to the sun square moon, but these are also people where even if their parents were together, let's say you lived in a household where your mother and father were two just completely different individuals, and they often butt heads, right? These people could often have felt like they were in the middle or placed in the middle of family circumstances and situations. And that's something that could carry or follow them throughout the course of their lives as well. These are also people who are very, once again, confrontational and just reactive or reactionary with their emotional responses. And these emotional responses do tend to threaten or undermine their reputation or public standing. These are people who can just bounce back and forth between two extremes in terms of their personality and the way that they present themselves to the world. And it's hard for these people to feel comfortable. And that is something that they do have in common with the sun square moon. Also, their emotions tend to go to extremes as well. Okay. And you'll tend to find that there will be areas of their lives that are almost always extremely out of balance. They often have issues with the opposite sex as well, but also issues with forming harmonious relationships. And like I said, even though this is similar to the sun square moon with the sun in opposition to the moon, these are people who can be very codependent, but they can often teeter back and forth between codependency and downright selfishness. Okay. These are also people who have a difficult time balancing out their conscious mind with the subconscious mind, which can often put them into sticky situations as well. They often put a lot of time and effort into cultivating one part of who they are, and it usually happens at the expense of the other. And they often experience this issue in terms of the pressure of being who other people want them to be versus being who they want to be. Okay. And once again, that feeling of just being caught in the middle, not knowing what to do. I've even seen this manifest or show up as a person who maybe feels compelled to put on an act or to kind of overdo certain parts of who they are. And as a result, it can kind of carry this like you're not who you say you are type of theme, right? These are people who, and once again, very similar to that sun square moon, for that reason, can just be very difficult to read or very difficult to understand. And I cannot stress enough the issues that come with other people with this. These can be very problematic people, or they can attract a lot of problematic situations their way. They can also be very competitive. And I noticed that these are people who are constantly immersed into what other people think of them. So they're more reliant or maybe even more aware of the way in which they show up in the world than your sun square moon person would be. So yeah, this concludes my video. You guys drop down in the comment section. Let me know if you have sun and negative aspects to the moon, or if you know someone who does, and how has this played out in your life, or how have you noticed this play out for others. And feel free to let me know if I missed anything. Let's have a discussion. I want to talk about this. So make sure you guys practice unconditional self-love so that you can love others. And until the next video, I holla.